Throughout Jujutsu Kaisen, we are shown a cavalcade of cursed techniques. Techniques that can do things as simple as just shooting blasts of cursed energy from your pompadour, or something as convoluted as a technique that requires knowledge of the Southern Cross star constellation to counter it. This is to say that there's a variety of cursed techniques that we see displayed throughout the series, which is quite impressive for a shonen. However, some cursed techniques that are shown to us readers and watchers seem to have been overlooked by a lot of the Jujutsu Kaisen fanbase at large. So in this video, I'm going to go over 5 of the most underrated cursed techniques in Jujutsu Kaisen, in my opinion. And if this video does well, I'll do a top 5 overrated cursed techniques. And trust me, if I make that video, people are really going to be hating me in the comments. With all that chilling out the way, let's just get to number 5. But also, real quick, when I say cursed techniques, I will mainly be referring to innate techniques and discussing the cursed technique created from them. So, for example, I wouldn't say hollow purple. I'd say the limitless and then discuss hollow purple or red or whatever. This is just because the term cursed technique and innate technique can sometimes be used interchangeably, depending on the character. Whatever, you'll understand once we get started. And finally, spoilers. At number 5, we have Haruta Shigemo's Miracles. Haruta's curse technique is kind of a strange one, so it's fairly understandable why many people either forget or just don't understand his curse technique, ironically enough, just like Haruta himself. And real quick, I feel like I have to ask this, is there anyone out there within the JJK fanbase that actually likes Haruta? Like, genuinely, I have yet to find an actual functioning human being that likes him as a character. He is seemingly universally either hated or just ignored by JJK's fanbase, and as a result, his curse technique goes pretty much under the radar for a lot of people. Haruta's miracles or luck is a technique that allows Haruta to store up miracles which are visibly shown via the triangular patterns under his eyes. Basically, whenever Haruta sees what he determines to be a little miracle, the example given of a little miracle being a clock having the same number on all of its spaces, whenever Haruta sees something that is determined to be a, quote, little miracle, it is erased from his memory, and the miracle that has just been erased is now stored underneath Haruta's eye as the aforementioned triangular shapes. These miracles are used whenever Haruta is in danger or about to suffer a fatal blow, as seen when Nanami is about to just straight up kill him. Whenever one of these miracles is used, one of the triangular shapes under his eyes will lose its colour and turn white. On paper, this ability sounds overcomplicated and kind of whatever, especially in the contexts we see the ability used. And on top of that, Haruta shares a similarity with Takaba's understanding of his own curse technique in that they both don't understand what their techniques do. Haruta seems to have a broad understanding that his luck saves him from death, but not how he gets more miracles or that they're lost, most likely since they're removed from his memory. However, when we look back through Haruta's appearances throughout JJK, we can really see how broken this ability is for survival. Haruta, a person who is arguably around the skill level of a grade 2 or semi-grade 1 sorcerer at a push, manages to survive confrontations with Nobara, Nanami, Megami, Mahoraga, and even the King of Curses, Sukuna, only finally being killed by Sukuna after his defeat of Mahoraga. Meaning someone who couldn't even scratch Nanami's shirt was killed by the King of Curses due to his own curse technique, which passively collects miracles that he doesn't even completely understand, keeping him alive till the latter half of Shibuya, which in my opinion is completely ridiculous. Number 4, Charles Benard's G.Warstaff. Yet again, we have a curse technique that props up a user who isn't anything remarkable from a strength aspect. Charles Benard as a character is kind of strange. He's kind of like Diet Higuruma, like significantly weaker than him, but has a similar background in regards to the culling game. He just got powers out of nowhere, he doesn't really want to participate too much, or is at least very iffy on the idea of the culling game, and ends up having one fight with someone from Jujutsu Tech. In Charles's case, unfortunately for him, he ends up getting put up against Kakari. My boy Charles never really had a chance. However, his curse technique did force Sakari to get a jackpot to inch out a victory win against Charles. So, what actually is Charles's curse technique? Basically, the technique itself, G.Warstaff, summons a long spear with an ink pen shaped blade. Charles then needs to draw the opponent's blood onto the blade's tip. Then, after this prerequisite is met, he can mark his opponent with a manga panel that will show him the near future of the person he has marked. The length of the manga panel / vision he sees scales to the amount of blood that is drawn from his opponent. A small cut on Hikari's cheek allows him to see 1 second in the future, another small cut on his forehead, 2 seconds. This technique took someone who Hikari didn't even take his hands out of his pockets for into an enemy that he needed to use his domain expansion on. Yeah, sure, you could argue that Hikari didn't need to activate his domain to beat Charles, which isn't an unfound argument. However, the fact that a character that Hikari initially fought doing a Sanji cosplay with had a cursed technique that Hikari deemed worthy enough to use his domain expansion on. And that is nothing to scoff at, especially since Hikari's only other opponent had been a scuffle with Yuji, and also Kashimo, one of the goats of the past, and currently he's fighting Urame, but we don't really know what's happening with that at the moment. I'm obviously not saying Charles is anywhere near the power of Urame or Kashimo, but the fact that this cursed technique, despite its major drawbacks, caused Hikari to second guess himself, and that's pretty cool. I've sung its praises pretty heavily here, so let me talk about its two major downsides real quick. The fact that Charles needs to not only be close enough to his opponent, but at least fast enough to be able to cut his opponent to activate his future sight. His future sight is also limited to his own field of vision, so if someone can simply speed blitz him or go around, like we saw the non-jackpotted Hikari do, the technique is significantly weaker. But in closing, in regard to this technique, it took a character like Charles, who could fight on okay-ish footing with a non-jackpotted Hikari, the same non-jackpotted Hikari who could throw a tank like post-Shibuya Yuji around like a ragdoll, and this technique forced him to use his domain expansion, debatably. Unfortunately, I doubt we'll ever see this cool technique again, to be honest. That's a shame. Number 3. Mechamaru's puppet manipulation. Mechamaru's got some pretty bad luck, to say the least. I mean, he's one of the few characters we see in the series with a heavenly restriction. Oh, great! Does that mean he has unfathomable speed, sensors, regeneration, and overwhelming strength like Maki and Toji? No, it means he's born with glass bones and paper skin. His skin's even weaker than paper, since his skin is so brittle it burns in natural sunlight, and he can't even feel anything below his waist. So even if he wanted to, he can't even walk out into the world. He's just kind of stuck like this for most of his life, looking like a Rurouni Kenshin villain. Now, what does he get in return? Well, he gets a hell of a lot of cursed energy that spreads over a large area, and he gets one hell of an innate technique. He is granted a large amount of cursed energy that is spread over a wide range, and this goes really well with his cursed technique, puppet manipulation. Kokichi Muta, otherwise known as Mechamaru, gains the ability to control cursed corpses / puppets over a large range, as well as in large numbers, as we see during the fight with Mahito. Also, I just need to kind of say this, calling this man Mechamaru is kind of f***ed up. I mean, imagine getting a name based on the equivalent of a prosthesis that is used to help you live your life normally. It's like the equivalent of calling a paraplegic guy Wheelchair Smith, and Smith ain't even in his name. Same with Kokichi, there is no Maru in his name, yet he's called Mechamaru. He's just named after the JJK equivalent of a crutch, and now he's just cool with it. It's kind of messed up. Anyway, Mechamaru's ability is yet again, like the previous curse techniques, something that significantly boosts someone who is quite unremarkable, all things considered, into being something that is a hell of a lot stronger. For example, when we see Mechamaru at the Goodwill event, he's struggling to fight against Panda, a semi-grade 2 sorcerer. Then, when he's at his strongest, with his strongest puppet, Ultimate Mechamaru, Absolute, he can fight Mahito on a somewhat even playing field. Granted, this is after he got Mahito to give him functioning skin, and on top of that he was using cursed energy that he'd been storing throughout his entire life to attack Mahito with, but that did put him on the level of a special grade. Basically, when discussing Mechamaru, you need to understand that his Heavenly Restriction isn't his curse technique. His Heavenly Restriction just allows him to use his curse technique over a massive range, as well as store and compact cursed energy over his lifetime to use in attacks. So hypothetically, Mechamaru could have been born without his Heavenly Restriction, which would reduce his cursed energy and range, but would still allow him to control cursed puppets. The cursed technique of controlling puppets allowed Mechamaru to have the output of a special grade in combination with his Heavenly Restriction, and also allowed him to be one of the few people in the verse to actually do damage to Mahito, which is a pretty big thing. But the major downside of this technique, if you want this level of power, you need to be willing to live 17 years of your life in a dark room with no light or social interactions. But the fact that Mechamaru's combination of Heavenly Restriction, Cursed Energy, and Cursed Technique allowed him to do damage to Mahito is astonishing. And as I said, he struggled against Panda, but as soon as he actually decides to flex, he's a temporary special grade. Cool, Cursed Technique. It's pretty much a longer range version of Sasori's 100 puppets, and that is a great thing. Number 2, Yorozu's construction. Creation as a curse technique is kind of slept on in Jujutsu Kaisen, and that is for one major reason. This dumb Mai is kind of the one who is most well known as the user of construction as a curse technique, or innate technique. And what does she do with this technique? 1 bullet. And she can't exceed that extra bullet, or she'll like die or something. In a world filled with malevolent shrines, hollow purples, and maharagas, all this girl can do is add a 7th bullet to her 6 shooter, and that sucks. So a lot of people sleep on construction as an ability. Even when she makes something more than a bullet, like making the soul splitter or the soul split katana, she literally dies. Like, it paints this technique in a very poor light. However, as the manga continues, we get to see what a real practitioner of this innate technique can really do. Enter Yorozu. Now, this is how you should use construction. The way Yorozu uses her innate technique of construction is incomparable to that of Mai. Like, oh my god, the fact that she can create liquid metal to suit any of her combat needs, such as a full-on Monster Hunter armor set that enhances all of her already high stats. It's said that she can even replicate whatever substance she wants with enough practice, besides curse tools, which is pretty darn jacked. Like, let me put it another way. Yorozu, pretty strong. I mean, she was one of the strongest in the Heian era, gaining recognition from the Fujiwara clan after defeating the 5 empty generals of Tor. Whatever that means, I just think it means she bodies Yoro. Basically, when she first started as a sorcerer, she was pretty much just like Mai, but better and with more cursed energy. But, unlike Mai, she realised the weaknesses of construction as a cursed technique, developed it to the point where she was one of the strongest of her era, making armour based off numerous insects after she saw how efficient they were, butterflies, hornets, beetles, combining all of them with her cursed technique. She even continued developing it past that, making her one of the few sorcerers in the world of JJK with a domain expansion. Yorozu developed her technique to the point where she was fighting a nerfed schooner. Like, that might not sound like much, but if the reason you're defeated boils down to either schooner or maharaga, you're pretty strong. Granted, Schooner was roasting her ass as she was dying, calling her curse technique out for having poor efficiency, as he says, but hey, she still fought with the King of Curses and arguably put in more work than Jogo. I mean, she landed a couple hits. Jogo didn't, and arguably she was fighting a stronger version of Schooner. Just saying. Granted, the hits she did land healed as soon as they appeared, but I still think it counts. Yorozu was putting in work, okay? Next technique. Okay, a little bit of an honourable mention. Jogo's Disaster Flames. Well, after gassing up Yorozu by talking about how well she did against Schooner, let's talk about my favourite little Cyclops, his Disaster Flames. Jogo's innate technique faces the unfortunate fate of being used, for the majority of the time, against 2 of the strongest characters in the entire verse of Jujutsu Kaisen, those obviously being Gojo and Schooner. As he quite heavily lost against these 2, that must mean his flames are kind of a joke. I mean, the only other people he used them on were pretty much already dying, those being Nanami, Maki and Naobito after facing Dagon. However, despite Jogo's win-loss ratio somehow being in the negatives, Jogo's Disaster Flames should not be scoffed at. Since this is only an honourable mention, I'll only focus on one specific aspect of his Disaster Flames. During Jogo's scuffle with Schooner, he uses a technique known as Maximum Meteor. Now, this move even scared Kusakabe, a man who withstood a Maximum Uzumaki. He was afraid of Maximum Meteor. To further look into Maximum Meteor, Kenjaku states that the Maximum techniques are a variation of curse techniques. They are the most supreme art, only being topped by domains, meaning this Meteor is pretty much the peak form of Jogo's Disaster Flames. The technique itself is very simple. Jogo's Disaster Flames simply allow him to create flames and beams of lava from his own cursed energy. A really simple technique that is used against 2 of the strongest characters in the verse. Just wish Jogo didn't get killed by flames. Ironically, Schooner was cold as for that. Number 1. Yaga's Cursed Corpses. Okay, Yaga is a veteran in the Jujutsu world, and his technique has allowed him to be perfectly suited for a teaching position, as well maintain a rank as a grade 1. Well, what is this cursed technique? Masamichi Yaga has the ability to infuse inanimate objects with cursed energy, but more specifically a cursed energy core, and when he does so, it brings them to life, quite similarly to Mechamaru's innate technique. However, in Yaga's case, he doesn't need to spend a lifetime in a blender to get his cursed technique, or needs a heavenly restriction to use it in the perfect way. Also, Yaga's control over these cursed corpses are lesser than that of Mechamaru's. He can control his cursed corpses using commands, or in the case of Panda, his cursed corpses can be completely sentient. On the surface, this just seems like a weaker version of Mechamaru's technique. However, the corpses that Yaga creates become self-sufficient after they are created, meaning that they don't need to be controlled like Mechamaru's dolls. They can work without Yaga's input. There is also zero limit to how many cursed corpses Yaga can create. Hypothetically, Yaga could create an army of corpses similar to the fleet of cursed spirits used by Geto in JJK0. And I am not the only one with this line of thinking, as even some of the higher-ups of Jujutsu Tech wanted to make Yaga a special grade sorcerer and place a restriction on him so that he could not create an army of corpses to follow him. Don't forget who we are talking about here in regards to this curse technique. Masamichi Yaga, this dude, the man who was killed by Gakuganji, this man. From his curse technique alone, it put enough fear into the higher-ups of Jujutsu High to consider making him a special grade sorcerer. Think about that. Who are special grade sorcerers? Geto, Gojo, Tsukumo, Yuta. That's it. The fact that the potential of this curse technique scared the higher-ups so much that it was even considered to be put on that level of sorcerer is absolutely astonishing. And not like a temporary special grade like Mechamaru during the fight with Mahito. A full-ass special grade. And that to me is wild. So, overall, this technique allows Yaga to craft sentient or non-sentient cursed corpses that he can control or leave to their own will. But because his character is pretty chill, he never really does that. He never made an army. He made Panda. He helped Kusakabe's sister get over her son's death by infusing the info from her son's soul into a corpse. Oh yeah, he can do that, by the way. He can just kind of raise the dead and put them in plushes, which is like another wild facet of this curse technique, but by this point, you get the point. This curse technique put a ridiculous amount of fear into the higher-ups, and the one that caused it was Yaga. It just goes to show how underrated this technique is, since it was wasted on someone who got killed by gosh darn Gakuganji. Like, bruh. So yeah, those are 5 underrated curse techniques, innate techniques, whatever. Let me know if you agree, and let me know some other underrated techniques in the comments. And if you want the top 5 overrated curse techniques, let me know, because people will have a field day in the comments with that one. So yeah, here's some of my other JJK videos you might enjoy, and toodles. Catch you in the next one. Peace.